What happens when a millionaire marries the ugliest woman he can find as a cruel joke? But as they say, fate has a wicked sense of humor. When an unexpected turn of events forces him to truly see the woman he married, everything changes. What started as a heartless prank becomes a journey that will challenge everything he thought he knew about love, beauty, and the true meaning of happiness.
The sound of clinking glasses and forced laughter echoed through the grand halls of the imposing Blackwood mansion. It was just another of Maxwell Blackwood's famous parties. The eccentric billionaire from New York, known as much for his fortune as for his disdain for society that surrounded him. Maxwell, a 40-year-old man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, observed the crowd from the top of the marble staircase. His face, although handsome, bore an expression of boredom and contempt. Another night wasted with empty people, he thought, swirling the whiskey in his crystal glass. That's when his eyes landed on her. Among the impeccably dressed waiters, a misplaced figure stood out, a woman of about 30 years, with dull brown hair tied in a poorly made bun, oversized glasses on her slender face, and a uniform that seemed twice her size. Who was that creature? Maxwell asked his butler, Charles. I believe she's a new waitress, sir. Emily Thornton, if I'm not mistaken, Charles replied with a slight tone of disapproval. A malicious smile formed on Maxwell's lips. His eyes sparkled with a sudden idea, a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. Charles, my dear friend, I think I've finally found a way to amuse myself in this dull evening, said Maxwell, descending the stairs with purpose. As he approached Emily, who was struggling to balance a tray of glasses, Maxwell felt the curious gazes of the guests. What could the great Maxwell Blackwood want with that unremarkable waitress? Emily, realizing the host's approach, froze. Her hands trembled, causing the glasses to chime dangerously. Good evening, Miss Thornton, Maxwell said, his voice as smooth as velvet. May I have a moment of your time? Emily swallowed nervously, nodding. Clearly, Mr. Blackwood. Maxwell gently removed the tray from Emily's trembling hands, handing it to a nearby waiter. Then, to the shock of everyone present, he offered his arm to her. How about a stroll through the gardens? I have a proposal I'd like to discuss with you, he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily, confused and apprehensive, accepted the offered arm. As the unlikely pair headed towards the lantern-lit gardens, whispers erupted at the party. Little did they know that this seemingly insignificant moment was about to trigger a series of events that would change their lives forever. Maxwell Blackwood, the man who had everything, was about to make the riskiest bet of his life, and Emily Thornton, the woman society overlooked, would be the centerpiece of this dangerous game. As they moved away from the party, Maxwell felt a wave of adrenaline. Finally, something to break the monotony of his privileged existence. He could hardly wait to see how his little social experiment would unfold. Emily, on the other hand, felt her heart pounding furiously. What could a man like Maxwell Blackwood want with someone like her? With her heart racing, she listened to the carefully crafted words of courtship from Maxwell. His smooth and melodious voice enveloped her like silk, each word chosen to seduce and charm. Emily, Maxwell said, his eyes fixed on hers. From the moment I saw you, I felt something special. You're different from all the other women here. There's a beauty in you that goes beyond the surface. Emily felt her cheeks flush. Her, who had never received any male attention, couldn't believe what she was hearing. Maxwell's words were like a balm to years of rejection and invisibility. Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what to say, she stuttered, struggling to find the words. Say, you'll give me the chance to know you better, Maxwell replied, taking her hands in his. Allow me to show you the world you deserve. At that moment, under the moonlight and surrounded by the scent of roses in the garden, Emily found herself unable to resist. She allowed herself to be swept away by the rehearsed seduction, her heart yearning for something she never believed possible. Yes, she whispered, almost breathless. I'd love to know you better, Mr. Blackwood. A triumphant smile crossed Maxwell's lips, so quick that Emily barely noticed. His plan was in motion. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself in a whirlwind of emotions and events. Luxurious dates, expensive gifts, and constant attention from Maxwell left her dizzy with happiness. When the marriage proposal came, just 3 weeks after their first encounter in the garden, Emily did not hesitate to say yes. And so, almost without realizing how she got there, Emily found herself before the doors of St. Patrick's Cathedral, about to become Mrs. Blackwood. The Grand Hall of St. Patrick's Cathedral was filled with members of New York's high society, all dressed in their finest gowns and suits. The buzz of conversations came to an abrupt halt as the doors swung open, revealing Emily Thornton. The bride was unrecognizable. Her white silk dress, designed by one of the world's most renowned stylists, elegantly hugged her curves. Her once lifeless hair now fell in soft waves, framing a face that had been carefully made up to enhance her delicate features. The large glasses were replaced by contact lenses, revealing deep, expressive brown eyes. Maxwell Blackwood, standing at the altar, couldn't suppress a smile of satisfaction. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The guests' shocked expressions were exactly what he had anticipated. As Emily walked down the aisle, she could feel the astonished gazes and the disbelieving whispers. Is that really her? How could Maxwell? This must be some kind of joke. Emily kept her chin up, determined not to let the malicious comments affect her. In the past few weeks, since that fateful night in the garden, her life had been turned upside down. The sudden proposal from Maxwell, the frenzy of wedding preparations, it all seemed like a surreal dream. Reaching the altar, Emily met Maxwell's eyes. For a moment, she saw something in them. A glint of amusement? Mockery? That made her hesitate. But then he smiled, that charming smile that had won her over, and her doubts vanished. The celebrant began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the hall. We are gathered here to celebrate the union of Maxwell Blackwood and Emily Thornton. As vows were exchanged, Emily felt her heart racing. It was real. It was actually happening. She, the unremarkable waitress, was marrying one of New York's most eligible bachelors. You may now kiss the bride. Maxwell leaned in, his lips meeting Emily's in a kiss that, to the guests, seemed passionate. But Emily felt something different, a coldness, a lack of emotion that left her bewildered. The reception that followed was a whirlwind of forced pleasantries and curious stares. Emily felt like an animal on display, analyzed and judged from all sides. It was only late into the night, when they finally found themselves alone in the Blackwood Mansion's bridal suite, that the truth came out. Maxwell, loosening his tie, turned to Emily with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, darling, I suppose our little show was a success, wasn't it? Emily frowned, confused. Show? Oh, come now. Maxwell laughed, pouring himself a glass of champagne. You didn't really think this was real, did you? A man like me, marrying someone like you? Emily's world crumbled. But, you said, the ring, the vows. All part of the game, my dear, Maxwell explained, his voice cold and calculating. You see, I was bored. I needed something to shake things up, to shock society. And you, well, you were perfect for the role. Tears began to form in Emily's eyes, but she held them back. A rage started to bubble in her chest, mixed with determination she didn't know she possessed. And now? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Maxwell shrugged, indifferent. Now we live out our farce for a while. Let the press speculate. Let society talk. In a few months, we divorce. You walk away with a handsome financial settlement. I return to my life. Everyone wins. Emily stared at him, an idea forming in her mind. If he wanted to play, she would play, but the rules would be hers. Fine, Maxwell, she said, forcing a smile. If that's how you want it, so be it. But remember, you're not the only one who can act. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Perhaps his little experiment was going to be more interesting than he imagined. As they prepared for bed in separate rooms, both reflected on what was to come. Maxwell, confident in his control of the situation. Emily, determined to turn the game in her favor. The stage was set for a marriage that promised to be anything but conventional. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of the Blackwood Mansion's master suite. Emily slowly opened her eyes, still disoriented by the luxury surrounding her. It had been a week since the wedding, and the reality of her new life still felt like a distorted dream. Beside her, the bed was empty. Maxwell, as always, had already left for the office. Emily sighed, remembering the conversation from the previous night. "Remember, darling," Maxwell had said, his tone condescending. "We have an important lunch tomorrow with the Vanderbilts. Try to be more like a Blackwood and less like yourself." The word still stung, but Emily was determined not to let Maxwell see how much they affected her. She got up, determined to face another day in this elaborate farce. The lunch with the Vanderbilts was a trial by fire for Emily. Seated at the elegantly set table, she could feel the evaluative glances of the guests. Maxwell, beside her, seemed tense, as if expecting her to commit some embarrassing faux pas at any moment. However, to everyone's surprise, especially Maxwell's, Emily performed admirably. She navigated the complexities of table etiquette skillfully, participated in conversations about art and literature with surprising knowledge, and even made Mrs. Vanderbilt laugh with a well-placed anecdote. When the guest departed, complimenting the charming Mrs. Blackwood, Maxwell couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. No, surely it was just relief that she hadn't ruined everything. "You did well today," he admitted reluctantly, as the servants cleared the table. Emily smiled, a glint of challenge in her eyes. "Thank you. Perhaps there's more to me than you imagine, isn't it?" That night, lying in his solitary bed, Maxwell found himself thinking about Emily. There was a depth to her that he hadn't expected. "Don't be ridiculous," he murmured to himself. "It's just part of the game." But a small voice at the back of his mind whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, he had underestimated Emily Thornton. On the other side of the hallway, in her own room, Emily reflected on the day. She knew she had surprised Maxwell, and a part of her rejoiced in that. But another part, one she tried to ignore, wondered if he would ever see her as more than a piece in his elaborate game. With a sigh, she turned off the light. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to show Maxwell Blackwood and herself that she was much more than she appeared. As the silence of the night enveloped the Blackwood mansion, both Maxwell and Emily fell asleep, unaware that the masks they had so carefully crafted were slowly beginning to slip away. The autumn air had settled over New York, painting Central Park with hues of red and gold. For Emily, the past 2 months had been an emotional roller coaster. She navigated carefully through Maxwell's world, always conscious of the role she was expected to play. That Saturday morning, Emily decided to take a walk through the park. Maxwell was in one of his endless business meetings, and she seized the opportunity to escape the suffocating confines of the mansion. Lost in thought as she walked, Emily didn't notice the bicycle speeding towards her. The cyclist shouted a late warning, and Emily, startled, stepped aside. Her heel caught in a crack in the sidewalk, and she fell, hitting her head hard on the ground. Everything went black. Maxwell was in the midst of a crucial negotiation when his cell phone rang. Irritated, he was about to ignore it when he saw it was Charles, his butler. "Sir," Charles's voice sounded tense. "There's been an accident. Mrs. Blackwood is at the hospital." Maxwell's world paused for an instant. "What kind of accident? Is she all right?" "I don't have the details, sir. Just that she's unconscious." Without a second thought, Maxwell ended the meeting and rushed to the hospital. On the way, an unexpected wave of emotions washed over him. Concern, fear, guilt. Feelings he hadn't expected to have for Emily. At the hospital, Maxwell was met by a nurse. "Mr. Blackwood, your wife has suffered a concussion. She's stable but still unconscious. The doctor wants to run some tests to rule out complications." Maxwell nodded, feeling strangely powerless. He was led to Emily's room and, seeing her lie in a hospital bed, looking so small and fragile, something inside him broke. He approached the bed hesitantly. His hand hovered over hers for a moment before finally touching it. "Emily," he whispered, "you need to wake up. You can't leave me like this." Hours dragged by. Maxwell refused to leave Emily's side, ignoring calls from his partners and assistants. For the first time in years, business was not his priority. As night fell, Emily finally began to stir. Her eyes slowly opened, disoriented. "Maxwell," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Relief flooded Maxwell. "I'm here," he replied, gently squeezing her hand. Emily looked at him, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "Sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to ruin your plans." Maxwell shook his head. "Don't say that. You're more important than any plan or business." The words came out before he could think, and both were shocked by their sincerity. In the days that followed, as Emily recovered in the hospital, Maxwell was rarely far from her side. He worked remotely from the hospital room, taking frequent breaks to check on Emily or simply talk to her. Emily, in turn, began to see a side of Maxwell she hadn't known. He was attentive, concerned, and surprisingly vulnerable. The masks they both wore started to slip, revealing the real people behind the facade. One afternoon, while Emily was idly flipping through a magazine, Maxwell surprised her with a question. "Why did you agree to marry me?" he asked softly. "You must have realized that it wasn't real." Emily looked at him for a long moment before answering. "At first, it was because you made me feel special. Then, I think I wanted to prove something. To you, to the world, to myself." Maxwell nodded, thoughtful. "I was a fool," he admitted. "A blind, arrogant fool." "And now?" Emily asked, her heart racing. Maxwell took her hand, his eyes meeting hers. Now I'm not sure of anything, except that I don't want to lose you." The ensuing silence was charged with emotion and unsaid possibilities. Both knew that something fundamental had changed between them. The game Maxwell had initiated with such levity now transformed into something much deeper and more daunting. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow through the hospital window, Maxwell and Emily remained holding hands, contemplating the uncertain future that lay ahead. The accident that almost separated them turned out to be the catalyst that brought them together, tearing down the barriers they had built around their hearts. Blackwood Mansion, once a symbol of opulence and coldness, now seemed strangely welcoming. Emily, fresh out of the hospital, rested on the living room sofa, wrapped in a soft blanket. Maxwell, seated in a nearby armchair, watched her with a mixed concern and something he couldn't yet name. "Are you sure you're comfortable?" he asked for the third time in an hour. Emily smiled, a little exasperated but touched by his attention. "I'm fine, Maxwell. You don't need to hover over me constantly." Maxwell nodded but made no move to leave. In the past few days since the accident, he had barely left Emily's side. The man who once lived for business now seemed to have found a new priority. As silence settled between them, comfortable yet laden with unspoken words, Maxwell found himself reflecting on his life. Memories of a privileged yet lonely childhood mingled with images of extravagant parties and ruthless business deals. Over the years, he had built an empire, but at what cost? "Emily," he began hesitantly, "have you ever wondered why I am, how I am?" Emily looked at him, surprised by the unexpected question. "I guess everyone has their reasons for being who they are," she answered cautiously. Maxwell stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the garden he rarely appreciated was in full bloom. "You know, my father used to say that feelings were for the weak, that to succeed, one had to be ruthless." Emily listened in silence, realizing she was witnessing a side of Maxwell that few, if anyone, had ever seen. "I've spent my entire life proving my worth through money and power," he continued, his voice low. "But now, looking at you, I realize how much I miss along the way." He turned, facing Emily with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "I want to change, Emily. Be better. Not just for you, but for myself." Emily felt her heart quicken. "Maxwell, you don't have to." "I do," he gently interrupted. "For too long, I've lived an empty life, using people as pawns in a game I made up, including you." He moved closer, kneeling beside the sofa. "I understand if you can't forgive me, but I'd like to try doing things differently. Start anew, perhaps." Emily studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of falsity in his eyes. But all she found was sincerity and vulnerability. "Okay," she finally said. "Let's start over." In the days that followed, Blackwood Mansion witnessed a gradual transformation. Maxwell canceled non-essential meetings, delegated tasks, and spent more time at home. He and Emily began having meals together, talking about their lives, their dreams, and fears. That night, lying in separate rooms, both reflected on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. Maxwell, in particular, felt as if he was awakening from a long sleep, seeing the world, and Emily with new eyes. The next morning, during breakfast, Maxwell surprised Emily once again. "I've been thinking," he began a bit nervously. "Maybe we could turn part of the mansion into a community center, to offer classes and resources for people in need." Emily stared at him, speechless. "Maxwell, that's incredible. But are you sure? That would be a significant change." Maxwell nodded, determined. "I'm sure. It's time to use my resources for something more than just accumulating more wealth." As they discussed the details of the project, Emily couldn't help but notice the sparkle in Maxwell's eyes, the energy in his voice. This was not the cold, calculating man she had married. This was someone new, someone she was beginning to admire and perhaps to love. As the day progressed, they both knew they were at the beginning of a new journey. A journey of self-discovery, redemption, and, who knows, true love. The game Maxwell had started months ago now transformed into something much deeper and more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. Winter had taken over New York, and Blackwood Mansion was draped in a white blanket with the season's first snow. Inside, the warmth of the crackling fireplace in the library created a cozy atmosphere where Maxwell and Emily spent increasingly more time together. That evening, as they shared a bottle of red wine, Maxwell noticed Emily looking pensively into the flames. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, setting his glass on the coffee table. Emily hesitated for a moment before responding. "I was remembering my childhood. It's funny how the approach of Christmas brings so many memories to the surface." Maxwell leaned forward, interested. Over these months, Emily rarely spoke about her past. "What kind of memories?" Emily sighed, her eyes still fixed on the fire. "Not all of them good, to be honest." Sensing the seriousness of the moment, Maxwell moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily looked at him, surprised by the genuine concern in his eyes. She nodded slowly. "I grew up in a poor neighborhood in Brooklyn," she began, her voice low. "My mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. My father, well, he was out of the picture before I was even born." Maxwell listened in silence, his heart tightening with each word. "In school, I was the odd girl out. Big glasses, hand-me-down clothes, always with my nose in a book." Emily gave a bitter laugh. "The other kids were cruel. They called me Ugly Duckling and made bets about whether I'd ever get a date." "Emily, Maxwell started, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. "I found solace in my studies. It was the only thing that gave me a sense of worth. I managed to get a scholarship for college, but even there, things weren't much different. I was the awkward scholarship kid among a sea of rich, beautiful students." Emily paused, taking a sip of wine, before continuing. "After college, things didn't improve much. Dead-end jobs, tiny apartments, disastrous dates. Until I got the job as a waitress at your party." Maxwell felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He remembered how he had seen her that night, how he had judged her without knowing her. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked, "for what you went through and for how I treated you." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you know what's ironic? When you proposed that fake marriage, it was the first time I felt chosen. Even knowing it was a farce, a part of me wanted to believe that someone finally saw me." Maxwell took her hands in his. "I see you now, Emily. Truly see you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelations hanging between them. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," Maxwell said finally. "Going through all that and still being able to smile, to see the good in others, that's real strength." Emily smiled through her tears. "I don't always feel strong." "But you are," Maxwell insisted. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. I always thought strength was about not showing weakness, about not letting anyone get close. But you've shown me that real strength is about being vulnerable, about opening up even after you've been hurt. Emily looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. Maxwell, he stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, snow was falling gently, covering the world in a pure white blanket. I've spent my whole life building walls, he said, his voice almost a whisper, keeping people at bay, measuring the value of everything and everyone in dollars and cents. But you, he turned to face her, you knocked down those walls without even trying. Emily stood up, walking over to him. Maybe it was time those walls came down. Maxwell nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Emily, I know I started all this as a cruel game, but now I want to do things right. I want to know you, truly know you. I want you to know me. Emily felt her heart race. I'd like that, she said softly. That night, they talked for hours. Maxwell shared stories from his privileged yet emotionally neglected childhood. Emily spoke about her dream of becoming a writer, a desire she had buried under years of insecurity. When the library clock struck midnight, they realized how much time had passed. I guess we should get some sleep, Emily said, reluctant to break the moment. Maxwell agreed, but as Emily stood to leave, he took her hand. Emily? She turned, questioning. Thank you, he said simply, for showing me there's more to life than I thought. Emily smiled, gently squeezing his hand before letting go. Good night, Maxwell. As each headed to their respective rooms, they both felt that something fundamental had changed between them. The mask had fallen completely, revealing not just their scars, but also the beauty of their souls. Spring arrived in New York, bringing not only the blossoming of flowers, but also the flourishing of an unexpected love in the Blackwood mansion. Maxwell and Emily, who had begun their journey as pieces in an elaborate game, now stood on the threshold of something profound and genuine. One sunny morning in April, Emily awoke to the sound of soft music coming from downstairs. Intrigued, she descended the stairs, still in her robe, to find Maxwell in the kitchen, attempting, not very successfully, to make pancakes. Maxwell Blackwood, are you cooking? Emily asked, unable to suppress a amused smile. Maxwell turned, a smudge of flour on his cheek. Well, I'm trying. I thought I'd do something special for breakfast. Emily approached, observing the kitchen chaos. And what exactly inspired the sudden culinary urge? Maxwell set aside the spatula and looked at Emily with an intensity that made her catch her breath. You, he said simply, you inspire me to be better, to do things I never thought I would. Emily's heart quickened. Over the past months, since that night of confessions in the library, they had grown closer and closer. Yet there was still a thin line neither had dared to fully cross. Let me help, Emily offered, taking the bowl of batter. Before you set the kitchen on fire. Together, they finished preparing breakfast, laughing at Maxwell's awkward attempts and savoring the simplicity of the moment. Emily, he began, his voice trembling slightly, I know we started this all the wrong way. I was an arrogant fool, blind to what really matters in life. But you've opened my eyes. You've shown me a world I didn't even know existed. Emily watched him, barely daring to breathe. I've fallen in love with you, Maxwell continued, his words now coming in a hurried flow. Not with what I thought you could be, or what I wanted you to be, but with who you truly are. Your strength, your compassion, your ability to see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Maxwell, He took her hands in his. I know I don't deserve your love. Not after how everything began. But if you could give me a chance, a real chance this time, I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Emily looked at their intertwined hands, then back into Maxwell's eyes. In them, she saw not the cold, calculating man who had chosen her months ago, but someone new, someone who had grown, changed, and become better. Maxwell, she finally said, her voice soft but firm, I've also fallen in love with you, with the man you become, with the man who was always there, hidden beneath layers of pain and fear. Maxwell's face lit up with a smile Emily had never seen before. It was pure, genuine, filled with joy and hope. Slowly, as if fearing the moment might shatter, Maxwell leaned in and kissed Emily. Unlike the stage kiss at their wedding, this one was real, deep, and filled with promises. When they pulled apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Emily said, "I think we need to renew our vows, this time for the right reasons." Maxwell nodded, his eyes shining. I couldn't agree more. Encouraged by Maxwell, Emily began writing again. Her stories, inspired by her own experiences and the people she met through community work, soon caught the attention of a publisher. Maxwell, in turn, redirected much of his resources toward philanthropic causes. He discovered a satisfaction in helping others that no profitable business had ever provided. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the mansion's garden, now open to the public as a community park, Emily looked at Maxwell. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "How everything started." Maxwell stopped, turning to face her. "I regret being the kind of person who thought they could play with others' lives. But I can't regret something that brought me you, that made me the person I am today." Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "I guess we both transform, haven't we?" "Like butterflies emerging from cocoon," Maxwell agreed, leaning in to kiss her gently. As the sun set over New York, casting a golden glow over the couple, they both knew they had found something rare and precious, a love born from the ashes of cruel game, transformed by the power of compassion, forgiveness, and self-reflection. The game had ended long ago. What remained was real, strong, and beautiful in its authenticity. The summer in New York was at its peak, intense heat contrasting with the tense atmosphere hanging over Blackwood Mansion. Maxwell and Emily, now truly united in love and purpose, faced their greatest challenge yet. It all began with a bombshell headline in the New York Times: "Blackwood Empire at risk. Shareholders question new philanthropic direction." Maxwell tossed a newspaper onto the breakfast table, his face a mask of concern. "They're trying to oust me from the presidency of the company," he said to Emily, who looked at him with apprehension. "But why?" Emily asked, picking up the newspaper to read the details. "Apparently, my new approach is not aligned with the shareholders' interests," Maxwell replied, the bitterness evident in his voice. "They think I'm wasting company resources on philanthropic projects." Emily placed a comforting hand over his. "What can we do?" Before Maxwell could respond, the phone rang. It was Charles, the butler, announcing the unexpected arrival of visitors. In the living room, they found Richard Blackwood, Maxwell's older brother, accompanied by two stern-looking lawyers. Richard greeted coldly, his eyes briefly turned to Emily with thinly disguised disdain. "I suppose you've seen the news. We're here to discuss the future of Blackwood Enterprises." The hours that followed were tense. Richard and the lawyers presented a series of documents, graphs, and projections, all pointing to a supposed decline in stock value since Maxwell had initiated his social projects. "You're ruining our family legacy," Richard accused, his voice laden with contempt. "And all for what? Because of this waitress you insist on calling your wife." Maxwell rose abruptly, his eyes flashing with anger. "Watch your tongue, Richard. Emily is my wife, and she has more integrity in her pinky finger than you do in your entire body." Emily, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. "Mr. Blackwood," she addressed Richard, her voice calm but firm, "I understand your concern about the company, but have you ever considered that a family's true legacy isn't measured just in dollars and cents?" Richard stared at her, taken aback by her boldness. "And what would you know about legacies, miss? You come from nowhere." "Exactly," Emily responded, unshaken. "And that's why I can see the value in what Maxwell is doing. He's creating opportunities for people who never had a chance. That's priceless." Maxwell looked at Emily with admiration, feeling a wave of love and pride. He turned to his brother and the lawyers. "I'm not backing down. If you want to fight, you'll have one." In the days that followed, Blackwood Mansion transformed into a center of operations. Maxwell and Emily worked tirelessly, rallying allies, preparing documents and strategies for the shareholder assembly that would decide the company's future. One night, exhausted after a long day of preparations, they found themselves in the garden, seeking a moment of peace. "You don't have to go through this," Maxwell said softly to Emily. "I never wanted to drag you into a corporate battle." Emily took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Maxwell, we're a team now. Your battles are my battles. And besides," she smiled, "I guess I underestimated how much I enjoy a challenge." Maxwell pulled her close, kissing her gently. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every day." On the morning of the assembly, the tension was palpable. Maxwell and Emily arrived hand in hand, facing the curious and, in some cases, hostile stares of shareholders and the press. Richard was already there, surrounded by his allies, a confident smile on his face. "Ready to admit defeat, little brother?" he taunted. "This isn't over, Richard," Maxwell replied calmly. The assembly began, and Richard presented his case, painting a grim picture of the company's future under Maxwell's leadership. Graphs and projections were displayed, all pointing to an impending decline. When it was Maxwell's turn, he stood up, Emily by his side. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and clear, "today we are not just deciding the future of a company. We are deciding what kind of impact we want to have on the world." He then presented his own numbers, showing how the philanthropic projects had actually improved the company's image, attracting new investors and partners who valued social responsibility. "But beyond the numbers," Maxwell continued, "I'd like you to hear from some people." To everyone's surprise, the doors opened and a series of people entered, young students benefiting from the scholarship program, families who had received help from the community center, and even some company employees who spoke about how the new policies had improved their lives. Emily then stepped forward. "I grew up with nothing," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "And now, thanks to Maxwell's vision, I can help others have opportunities one never did. This isn't wasting resources. It's investing in the future." A silence fell over the room as she finished speaking. Maxwell took her hand, both of them anxiously waiting while the shareholders deliberated. After what felt like an eternity, the result was announced. By a narrow margin, Maxwell would retain his position, with the condition that a committee oversee the philanthropic projects to ensure a balance with the company's financial interests. The room erupted in applause. Richard, furious, left without a word. Maxwell and Emily embraced, tears of relief and happiness in their eyes. "We did it," Emily whispered. "No," Maxwell gently corrected. "You did it. You saved us, Emily." As they left the building, facing the flashes of cameras and reporters' questions, Maxwell and Emily walked with their heads held high, more united than ever. They had faced their greatest trial and emerged victorious, not only saving the company, but reaffirming the values that now defined their life together. The love that had begun as a farce had proven to be stronger than anyone could have imagined, capable of overcoming even the most challenging obstacles. The autumn had returned to New York, bringing with it a symphony of golden and red hues. In the garden of the Blackwood Mansion, now a vibrant community park, a small group had gathered for an intimate and meaningful ceremony. Emily stood before the mirror in her room, adjusting the simple yet elegant white dress she had chosen for the occasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she put on a pair of earrings, the same ones her mother had worn on her own wedding day. A soft knock on the door caused her to turn. It was Sarah, one of the young beneficiaries of the scholarship program that Emily and Maxwell had created. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Blackwood," Sarah said with a warm smile. Emily returned the smile. "Thank you, Sarah. And please call me Emily." Sarah nodded, then hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I just want to thank you again for everything you and Mr. Blackwood have done for me, for all of us. You've changed our lives." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She moved closer to Sarah and hugged her. "You've changed ours too," she whispered. Across the mansion, Maxwell was adjusting his tie, his reflection revealing a man very different from the one who had proposed a facade of marriage over a year ago. Charles, the faithful butler, entered the room with a small box in his hands. "Sir, I thought you might want to wear this today." Maxwell opened the box, revealing a pair of gold cufflinks. He recognized them immediately. They had belonged to his grandfather, the founder of Blackwood Enterprises. "Charles," Maxwell said, moved, "where'd you find these?" "Your grandfather gave them to me before he passed away." Charles explained. He said to give them to you when I felt you were ready to understand the true meaning of legacy. Maxwell fastened the cufflinks, feeling the weight of the history and responsibility they carried. Thank you, Charles, for everything. In the garden, the guests took their seats. It wasn't a glamorous crowd like the first wedding. Instead, it was an eclectic group. Some executive from the company who had supported Maxwell's vision, families benefited by the social projects, and a few true friends who had stood by the couple through the tough times. Soft music began to play, and everyone turned to see Emily walking down the improvised aisle between the chairs. She didn't carry an elaborate bouquet, but a single red rose, a symbol of the simple, true love that had blossomed between her and Maxwell. Maxwell waited for her under an arch covered in wildflowers. His eyes shone with tears as he watched Emily approach. When she reached his side, he took her hands, unable to contain a smile of pure happiness. The celebrant, an old friend of Emily's from college, began the ceremony. "We are gathered here today," he said, "not to unite Maxwell and Emily in marriage, for they are already married. We are here to celebrate the extraordinary journey that has brought them to this moment, and to witness the renewal of their vows, this time based on true love, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place." Maxwell was the first to speak his vows. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "when we met, I was a lost man, arrogant, selfish, unable to see beyond my own ambition. You showed me a world I didn't know existed, a world of compassion, purpose, true love. You taught me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the hearts we touch and the lives we change. I promise to spend every day of my life trying to be the man you deserve, the man you've helped me become. I love you, not just for who you are, but for who I am when I'm with you." Emily wiped away a tear before beginning her own vows. "Maxwell," she said, her voice soft yet firm, "our story began like a twisted fairy tale. I was a Cinderella who didn't expect a happy ending. But you, my unlikely prince, proved that appearances deceive, not just mine but yours as well. Beneath the facade of the ruthless mogul, there was a man with a huge heart, waiting to be discovered. You've given me so much more than material wealth. You've given me confidence, purpose, and a love I never thought possible. I promise to stand by your side through every challenge we face, to celebrate every victory, and to continue growing together. I love you, not despite our complicated past, but because of it, because it's this journey that has brought us here." There were no dry eyes in the garden when they exchanged rings, simple bands of gold, engraved with the words, "Our true beginning." "By the power vested in me," the celebrant concluded, "I now pronounce you, once again and forever, husband and wife. You may seal your vows with a kiss." Maxwell and Emily kissed, a kiss full of promises for the future and gratitude for the path that had led them here. The small reception that followed was a celebration not just of Maxwell and Emily's love, but of the community they had built. Executives chatted animatedly with scholarship students. Families benefited by the social projects shared stories with old friends of the couple. As night fell, Maxwell and Emily found themselves alone for a moment, watching their guests dance and laugh. "So, Mrs. Blackwood," Maxwell said, pulling Emily close, "what do you think about starting our honeymoon?" Emily raised an eyebrow, amused. "Honeymoon? And where would we go?" Maxwell smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of love and mischief. "How about a world trip? Not to stay in luxury hotels, but to visit and support social projects in different countries. We could learn, help, and maybe even expand our work globally." Emily kissed him, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by people whose lives they had touched and transformed, Maxwell and Emily knew they were at the beginning of a new and exciting journey. A journey of love, purpose, and positive impact on the world. The game Maxwell had started over a year ago had transformed into something much larger and more meaningful than he could ever have imagined. And Emily, the Cinderella who never expected a happy ending, discovered that sometimes fairy tales do come true, just not in the way we expect. As the soft music played and the lights twinkled in the garden, Maxwell and Emily danced, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in every sense of the word. Their love, born from the ashes of a selfish plan, had transformed into a force capable of changing not just their own lives, but the world around them. And so, under the starry New York sky, the true happily ever after of Maxwell and Emily Blackwood began, a story of redemption, transformation, and the incomparable power of true love.
If you enjoyed the story, don't miss the next ones appearing on your screen. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. See you next time.